Well, welcome everyone. My name is Peter Awn. I'm professor of Islam and the new director of the Middle East Institute. It is a true privilege for me today to introduce our speaker, His Excellency Ambassador Ekmeleddin Ihsanoglu, who is the Secretary General of the Organization of the Islamic Conference and ambassador to the United Nations on behalf of the OIC. Professor Dr. Ekmeleddin Ihsanoglu of Turkey has been the first by vote elected Secretary General of the Organization of the Islamic Conference. Since taking office as the 9th Secretary General in January 2005, he has provided strong leadership to the 57 member states organization and espoused the cause of the Muslim world in these difficult times. Professor Dr. Ihsanoglu was born in Cairo and received his BS and master's degrees in chemistry from Ain Shams University in Cairo. After completing his PhD at Ankara University, he did postdoctoral research as a research fellow at the University of Exeter in the UK. He served as a faculty member in the faculties of science and then became the first professor and founding head of the Department of History of Science in Istanbul University. He's also the founding chairman of the Turkish Society for the History of Science. He has written numerous books, articles, papers in a variety of languages, including Turkish, English, and Arabic. He has received a number of honors from both Islamic and European countries around the world. He was conferred with the Medal of Glory by the President of the Republic of Azerbaijan, the Medal of Distinction of the First Order by the President of the Arab Republic of Egypt, the Independence Medal of the First Order by the King of Jordan, the Medal of Glory by the President of the Russian Federation, the Commandeur de l'Ordre National du Mérite, and the Commandeur de l'Ordre National de Lyon, awarded by the Republic of Senegal, and the Medal of Distinguished State Service by the President of the Republic of Turkey. He also received the World Prize for the Book of the Year from President Sayyid Mohammad Khatami, President of the Islamic Republic of Iran, in 2000. He's received numerous honorary doctoral degrees from universities in the Islamic world, Europe, and the United States. The Organization of the Islamic Conference, OIC, is the second largest intergovernmental organization after the United Nations, which has membership of 57 states spread abroad 4 continents. The organization is the collective voice of the Muslim world and works to safeguard and protect the interests of Muslims in the spirit of promoting international peace and harmony among various peoples of the world. The organization was established in 1969. We are enormously pleased and genuinely privileged to have His Excellency with us today. I would like to mention that he will also be speaking at New York University, located somewhere to the south, on September 25th from 6 to 8 p.m. In fact, it will take place at the Casa Italiana at 24 West 12th Street, and the panel will be on Europe and Islam, shared history, shared identity. But today we are delighted that Ambassador Ihsanoglu will be speaking to us on conflict resolution, a new vision for the role of the Organization of the Islamic Conference. Mr. Ambassador.
Distinguished Chairman, distinguished faculty members, ladies and gentlemen. I'm deeply privileged and honored to be able to address you in this prestigious house of learning, Columbia University. I would like at the outset to extend my sincere thanks and appreciation to Professor Richard Bullitt and Dr. Peter Owen, the Director of Middle East Center, and Associated Dean Dr. Rob Garris, as well as the School of International and Public Affairs, SIPA, for hosting this event today and publicizing it. SIPA, with its leading international record in training professionals, has made and could still continue to make a difference in the world, in social science research and in hands-on practice, as well as advocating human rights, protecting the environment, and securing peace at home and around the world. I'm pleased to have this opportunity to converse with you on the subject which attracts considerable attention in both Muslim and Western worlds. And I'm really glad to be in this house of learning as a former faculty member, as a former university professor, academician. I feel at home more than I do feel anywhere else during my new career as Secretary of OIC. I'm pleased to have this opportunity, and I'm going to talk to you about, as it has been agreed, about the OIC's new charter and its new visions and objectives, as well as its increasing role in international conflict resolution and prevention. As many here might have faint information about the OIC, Organization of Islamic Conference, I thought that it will be useful to give a short introduction about this organization and the reasons for its establishment. I also thought that it would be adequate to begin with a short glimpse on shedding light on the new charter of the OIC, which was adopted recently in mid of March, last March, in summit in Dakar. I also find it irresistible to dwell on the phenomenon of the so-called Islamophobia, which commands widespread attention in the world, especially and particularly in the West, after the terrible and vicious crimes committed on 9/11 of 2001. Finally, I will discuss the OIC efforts in conflict resolution and preventive diplomacy. Though the OIC is not a religious organization, we feel compelled on many occasions to clarify that Islam is the religion of moderation and compassion, a religion that celebrates diversity, pluralism, and recognition of the other. It recognizes and acknowledges both Christianity and Judaism and a host of other religions. Moderation in Islam has, for millennia on end, found its expression in diverse shapes and manifold meanings that have become the distinctive trait of Islamic civilization and its particular trademark. Islamic teachings are situated in middle way between divine and temporal, between what is material and what is spiritual, between individualism and personal liberty and responsibility and accountability towards the Creator and the society. Islam is also a practical religion because it is the religion of the collectivity, which means that what is good in the eyes of the consensual or unanimous community is also good in the eyes of the divine. Moreover, Islam is built on the premise that relations between humans can only be governed by virtue of the balanced principles of strict equality, perhaps first time in history of humanity. The principle of strict equality, justice, and fairness, which abhors fanaticism and extremism. It should be pointed out here that Islam is no stranger to America. It is today an integral part of the American religious landscape and a visible part of the fabric of the American society. Today, 1.58 billion souls around the world embrace Islam, and around 7 million of them reside in the United States. Islam is reckoned to be the fastest growing religion in the world. Islam, with its 14 centuries of existence, had a radiant history of success. It was a remarkable turning point in the history of civilization that brought about considerable change in the domain of human endeavor. I would like, in this context, to quote Prince Charles of England, who enumerated in a speech at Oxford Center of Islamic Studies some of the Islamic heritage rendered to the human civilization. And I quote, "We have underestimated the importance of 800 years of Muslim society and culture in Spain between the 8th and the 15th centuries. Not only did Muslim Spain gather and preserve the intellectual content of ancient Greek and Roman civilization, it also interpreted and expanded upon the civilization and made a vital contribution of its own in so many fields of human endeavor in science and different sciences. Many of the trails in which Europe prides itself came to it from Muslim Spain. Diplomacy, free trade, open borders, the techniques of academic research, of anthropology, etiquette, fashion, alternative medicine, hospitals, all came from this great city of cities." He means Cordoba. End of quote. Added to the contribution of Islam to European civilization, or human civilization, which stems from Andalusia, southwest of Europe, scholars tend to forget the contribution of Islam from a different angle, from southeast of Europe and the Balkans during the 500 or 600 years of the Ottomans. And I think that is an area which needs a good, thorough study to show how these two cultures, two civilizations intermingled in Europe. Ladies and gentlemen, the Muslim Ummah means the community of the faithful. It is a unique bond that has no similar example under any other political or religious system in the world. I think so. It is a belonging to ideals which bring Muslims together in an eternal brotherhood lock, which transcends all other considerations of allegiance or loyalties or barriers or nationhood, ethnicity, geography, or language. Over almost the last 14th century, Muslims the world over had a symbolic central authority which exercised mainly loose temporal authority and considered a focal point of Muslim unity. Under these circumstances, Islam and Muslims lived their golden ages with abundant prosperity, wealth, a vibrant civilization in a society that ennobled knowledge, cherished sciences, and offered a very rich legacy to human civilization. Mr. Chairman, the OIC is the first intergovernmental organization in the history of Islam. And it is nowadays one of the largest intergovernmental organizations in the world, second only to the United Nations, with a constituency of 57 member states and 5 observer states. The Muslim world has a formidable geographical stretch of land extending from the Atlantic shores to the confines of China and the shores of the islands of the Philippines and Indonesia, in addition to countries in South America. Mr. Chairman, sincere self-criticism has always been part of Islamic traditions, though very rare nowadays, but it still exists. In the recent history, the failing economies, the lack of good governance, the deteriorating conditions in human development in the socio-economic fields, the occupation of Iraq, the situation in Afghanistan, and the painful stalemate in Palestine, as well as increasing tension with the Western world, due to a number of reasons, including the rise of Islamophobia, prompted the Muslim leaders to undertake serious rounds of self-criticism, which culminated in 2005 in another landmark in the Muslim world recent history. Taking stock of their chronic failure and the urgent need to face the stark realities of today's world, the Muslim world leaders met at an invitation of the then Saudi Crown Prince Abdullah to elaborate a new strategy of salvation and revival for the Muslim world. Following the extraordinary gathering of Muslim scholars and intellectuals, we have gathered around 100 scholars from member countries, from European and American institutions, scholars, social scientists, economists, strategists, sociologues, scholars from different disciplines. And we had 3 days brainstorming about the problems of the Muslim world under 3 captions: political, economic, and cultural. Out of that, a program called Solidarity in Action was established, and out of that, a 10-year program of action was proposed to the summit, and it was unanimously accepted. This program and this report has the new vision of the OIC, which is an attempt to solve the problems, to identify the problems of the Muslim world in a more scholarly way, more in-depth, and try to attribute the problems of the Muslim world to the main causes of economic, social underdevelopment, and try to solve these problems through devising certain programs of development, socio-economic and cultural development. The program centered its focus on uplifting the standard of human development in the OIC countries in several fields of activities. One of the major reforms that emerged from this strategy was the overhauling of the organization charter and conferring it to a new vision, objectives, and principles which go in line with the prevailing universal contemporary realities and values. The Charter also gives prominence to democracy by prioritizing good governance. In this context, it asserts the rule of law, upholds and safeguards fundamental freedoms and accountability. The vision of the new Charter gives pronounced importance to and acknowledges the universality of human rights. Not only does it sanctify these rights, but it also establishes a permanent and independent Commission of Human Rights to monitor, document, and deal with any violation of these rights in the Member States. And this has been a part of new provision of the new Charter, and we are now working on establishing a high panel to address this issue, how we establish an independent commission for human rights in OIC. We are just about starting this activity. The Charter espouses and totally endorses diversity. In the same vein, it exalts tolerance, compassion, equality, and actively promotes dialogue among civilizations to ensure the prevalence of peace, security, and concord among all nations. The new vision addresses also the chronic predicament facing the Muslim world. It places great importance on the enhancement of socio-economic development in member states with a view to empowering the Muslim world to achieve effective integration in the global economy. Moreover, the new Charter urged the popularization of knowledge in the member states with the aim of creating the conditions conducive to the achievement of intellectual excellence, mainly in the realm of science and technology. The Charter does not neglect the pressing social issues prevalent in the Muslim states and gives due consideration to efforts related to the promotion of the role of the family It uplifts the role of women to ensure that their full participation in all spheres of life. It also emphasizes the importance of the sound upbringing of youth and children. In short, the new OIC Charter has sought to write the blueprint for an enlightened future to the Muslim world. Ladies and gentlemen, in introducing major reform schemes to the General Secretariat of the OIC during the last 3 years, the OIC started to be visible and felt on the international stage. Its relationship with major international organizations became stronger and more effective, and its credibility became proven as an important player and potent broker. Consequently, the OIC emerged as a trustworthy interlocutor. Presently, the OIC is seen as the unique and most trusted and authoritative spokesman for the Muslim world on the major global political issues, eminent among which are the questions of Palestine, Iraq, Kashmir, Afghanistan, Somalia, Cyprus, and other issues. It is in this light that the United States administration has recently come to appreciate and acknowledge the OIC role, and the White House took the decision of appointing a special envoy to the OIC, who took office and started work on consolidating relations between the United States and the Muslim world. Since I assumed my duties at the beginning of 2005, and particularly since March this year, under the new vision of the Charter, I have directed the OIC towards two-pronged direction: moderation and modernization. In this, the OIC stands firm in rejecting and condemning all forms of fanaticism, extremism, terrorism, and bigotry. It emphasized inter-civilizational and interfaith dialogues based on mutual respect and equality among interlocutors. The OIC also defends the respect of human rights and endeavors to promote good governance, to widen political participation, respect of the rule of law, ensuring transparency and accountability while combating terrorism in all its forms and manifestations, and rejecting all attempts to justify this scourge. A great deal of the efforts of OIC is now directed toward human development in the socio-economic spheres through concrete and practical programs, including poverty alleviation, education, science and technology, combating disasters, providing health services to newborns and mothers all around the Muslim world, elevating intertrade among member states, and elevating the status of women. Moreover, having been faced since my first year in office with mounting challenges of increasing negative feelings and misperceptions targeting Islam and Muslims, I have endeavored to promote dialogue, tolerance, mutual understanding, mutual respect, and political engagement at the international level. I have also insistingly called for historical reconciliation between Islam and Christianity, as was the case between Judaism and Christianity during the last century. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to turn now to the phenomena of Islamophobia. Islamophobia is a new name for an old phenomenon. It is bent on demonizing Islam and its adherents, and on spreading the world and on separating the world into rival civilizations. The tendency to divide the world into good and evil, civilized and uncivilized, is inviting hostilities, disputes, and instability. This tendency should be addressed seriously if there is to be dialogue across countries, faiths, and cultures, especially at the era of globalization. The recent notion of clash of civilizations only furthers stereotyping and all its pervasive evils. We believe that all religions in the world strive to raise morally and ethically responsible citizens in every society and civilization in order to ensure harmony and peace in the community of nations. Diversity and plurality are an established fact in today's global village. They present an integral part of this century's prevalent core value. The causes of Islamophobia are many, and some of them are rooted in historical animosity. Reports of Western intergovernmental and non-governmental organizations indicate that Islamophobia in the West is so widespread that it may be more prevalent and dominant than racial abuse. Some Western media's frequent portrayal and misrepresentation of Islam and Muslims have been one of the most persistent and virulent sources of prejudice against Muslims. It is now considered by the estimate of United Nations Alliance of Civilization as the prime dissemination of Islamophobia in the contemporary climate and recognized as the most serious international threat to stability. Some scholars are also constantly presenting their biased views against Islam under the guise of scholarly presentation in their bid to set a false paradigm of knowledge against Islam. What is more alarming in this climate is the fact that Islamophobia has become increasingly tolerated as if it had been given license to gain legitimacy, acceptance, and momentum to the extent that some started to see themselves on a collision course with Muslims and Islam. A major bone of contention with the proponents of Islamophobia is the question of freedom of expression. Although all agree that any freedom always linked to responsibility, such as respecting human rights and avoiding any form of incitement to hatred on the basis of race or religion itself, we find that some circles tend to ignore this basic universal and moral value and accuse Muslim victims of this racial hatred who are defending their human rights, nevertheless of trying to stifle freedom of expression. The collective efforts of the OIC and the member states have made an impact on the international community and have contributed towards raising global awareness of the dangerous implications of these phenomena. Political leaders and opinion makers, including academics and civil society leaders of the Western world, have now started to speak out against Islamophobia. The Dutch foreign minister, in his speech at the first Alliance of Civilization first Alliance of Civilizations annual forum in Madrid in January this year, stated, and I quote, "Those in my country," he means in Netherlands, "those in my country who call for the Quran to be banned are undermining the central principle of universal human rights. I condemn such calls in the strongest possible terms." End of quote. The United States government also showed its sensitivity to the concerns of OIC by its decision to avoid any Islamic terminology in their anti-Islamic terminology in their official memos and correspondence. The Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe passed a resolution on its 13th sitting on 15th of April this year, which inter alia called on the member states of the Council of Europe to, I quote, "act strongly against discrimination in all areas and condemn and combat Islamophobia, and recommended development of ethical guidelines to combat Islamophobia in the media and in favor of cultural tolerance and understanding in cooperation with appropriate media organizations." These are without doubt encouraging developments, but are not enough to effectively address the issue of Islamophobia. This awareness has also engendered some unfounded criticism, accusing the OIC of spreading anti-Christian bigotry. The critics escalate their attack by declaring that UN General Assembly's resolution on defamation of religion is direct violation of international law concerning the freedom of expression. The allegation that OIC is spreading anti-Christian bigotry cannot be more far from the truth. Islamic teachings make that believing in Christianity and the message of Jesus Christ an integral part of the Muslim law. Moreover, Jesus Christ in Islam is highly venerated as the Word of God, who produced many miracles and spread the culture of love and tolerance. The New Testament is also recognized in Islam as sacred book of revelation. As for the resolution against defamation, this resolution against defamation referred to above was adopted in 3 successive years by United Nations General Assembly and passed by comfortable majority. It strikes a balance between the freedom of expression and the inherent responsibility attached to every liberty as stipulated in the international law and endorsed in many Western national laws. It is clearly established that international law, and in particular the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, ICCPR, of 1966, forbids any incitement to religious hatred. Article 20 of this covenant stipulates that any advocacy of national, racial, or religious hatred that constitutes incitement to discrimination, hostility, or violence shall be prohibited by law. Any advocacy of all these things shall be prohibited by law. Despite this clear stipulation, the Attorney General of Denmark failed to see in the infamous Danish cartoons issues on Prophet Muhammad any incitement to hatred on basis of religion or belief. The same authority in Netherlands did the same thing in the case of film Fitna produced by a member of the Dutch Parliament. Such negative and indifferent attitudes adopted by officials in certain Western countries which seem to condone acts of an Islamophobic nature can only lead to legitimizing Islamophobia and enhancing discrimination against Muslims and exposing their well-being and safety to danger. It is alarming to see that the present campaign of dehumanizing and demonizing Muslims, which is supported by certain quarters in the West, consider Muslims as enemies. At this point, I wish to touch upon the role of politicians in this issue. What is expected from them is particularly a moral stand against provocative incitements targeting a part of their population and harming social peace with implications beyond their countries. We are not calling for government action to jeopardize or stifle freedom of speech, which we hail and we uphold as a fundamental right. However, we believe that it is the prerogative of a government to identify and react when sheer incitement to hatred, supposedly banned by international law, creep into their society under the guise of freedom of speech. And we would expect this to be done as the same. Anything against Christianity or against Semitism, the same actions and the same approach should be applied to Islam as well. I think here we have a problem. Well, I don't go to the extent reached by late Edward Said. When we are in Colombia, we have to mention this great scholar. When I don't go to the extent reached by him when he dismissed attacking Islam in the old Enlightenment as a form of cultural imperialism. But I tend to agree with him when he says that and I quote, "The Orient appears in Western art and literature as something exotic, unreal, theatrical, and therefore unfounded. The Orient might have been a genuine alternative to Western enlightenment. Instead, it is remade a decorative foil to the Western imperial project." End of quote. At this juncture, I will be amiss if I do not refer to the leading, pioneering book written by distinguished scholar Professor Richard Bullitt, "The Case for Islamo-Christian Civilization." What better remedy than Islamo-Christian civilization? My frequent calls for historical reconciliation between Christianity and Islam find its echo in Dr. Bullitt's book, which elucidates this issue in a more subtle and convincing way when he makes an ingenious argument that Islam and Christianity should be thought of as two versions of a common socio-religious system. In this context, he demonstrated in his narration that the two civilizations exhibit similar historical trajectories, went through the same development stages, confronted internal challenges, and traveled parallel, even in overlapping paths, until divergences developed in the later Middle Ages. He also recalled the Judeo-Christian civilization is a term originally coined by Nietzsche to deride both, and it was adopted only after the Second World War. Dr. Bullitt hoped to do the same by proposing an Islamo-Christian kinship that will help find a common ground between the two great civilizations. I think that this wise judgment will be one day pave the way towards realizing my frequent calls for historical reconciliation between Islam and Christianity. And if we look back to what happened in the previous century between Islam and between Christianity and Judaism, and how this reconciliation happened despite the great problems they had in their history since day one, I think it would be more easy to have this parallel reconciliation between Islam and Christianity, because I think the problems faced between Islam and Christianity were less than those experienced by Judaism and Christianity. Well, I think here that what we have to do, that we have to do our utmost to educate ordinary people to conceive human civilization as a universal human heritage to which all peoples belong and should help to share and enlarge. This perception is the one most relevant to our time. Its prevalence is a condition for any worthwhile dialogue which might lead us to a reliable and lasting peace. Mr. Chairman, as for the role of OIC in difficult domain of conflict prevention and conflict management, conflict resolution, I would like to say that our organization is doing its best to play an effective role in this direction. We have engaged many OIC member states or rival groups within these states to avert resorting to violence or fighting among themselves, thus preventing conflicts or resolving them. Sometimes we use our good offices to mediation in various disputes or send special envoys to contribute to finding peaceful solution to a given conflict. We have also resorted to similar practices such as organizing meetings of various groups of countries or individuals to debate the best way to find solutions to some disputes. The OIC 10-year program of action established an executive committee of selected member states to step in to settle disputes erupted among member states or to prevent disputes from occurring. In this context, we have convened a meeting in October 2006 at the holy city of Mecca of prominent Muslim religious leaders from both the Shia and the Sunni sects of Iraq to discuss the fratricide fighting that was taking place between their militant groups in the civil strife in Iraq. We have managed to convince both sides to agree on a document which stipulates that their fighting runs counter to the teaching of Islam and cannot be condoned and should be considered as a crime reprehensible under the mantle of Islam. The document was elaborated by an affiliated organ of our organization, which is in charge of Islamic jurisprudence. The two factions accepted the document and promised to popularize its contents among their followers. The net result was that the sectarian fighting in Iraq was reduced dramatically, a fact which contributed to substantially improving the security situation in Iraq. A few months ago, the OIC Baghdad office was opened to advance and promote the Mecca initiative on the ground in consultation with the Iraqi government and all parties. We consider our initiative as a meaningful contribution to the national reconciliation effort in Iraq. We have tried another approach in Somalia to stop the civil war, which started more than 16 years ago. Several OIC envoys and emissaries visited Somalia and met with the belligerent parties. However, until now, our efforts could not bring final peace to Somalia due to the deep-seated rancor among the different fractions and their warlords, and because of presence of foreign troops which complicated the crisis there. We intend to continue our efforts in cooperation with the international community. In the interactable Quack Bear in Darfur, we were also active in trying to find a peaceful and negotiated settlement, but the complexity of the situation has proven to be very difficult to remove the obstacle hindering any progress. We have resorted to personal efforts and shuttle diplomacy to stop the fratricide fighting between the Palestinian factions, Hamas and Fatah, to avert the fighting and bloodletting, and were successful to a certain extent. And at the same time, we acted as mediators in the frequent disputes and conflicts between the Sudan and Chad. We have established to this end a ministerial committee of conflict prevention in collaboration with other regional and international organizations, and we managed to score preliminary success, but the efforts are continuing to put a final end to this conflict. We are also engaged in an active effort to broker a peaceful settlement to the protracted conflict between the government of the Philippines and the Moro National Liberation Front in the southern part of Philippines. My special envoy to the Philippines succeeded in presenting a formula for settlement which was agreed upon, and we are presently engaged in implementing its provisions. We are closely following the developments in Afghanistan. We are worried that volatility and instability are on the rise. We have principled position against suicide killings and terrorist attacks in Afghanistan and elsewhere. However, we believe that the present strategies of the international community should be reconsidered. I also consider our initiative, which resulted in the OIC UN EU trilateral statement aimed at calming down the street protests in the Muslim countries during the heated days in the aftermath of publication of the offensive Danish caricatures, and our search for engagement with the European Union institutions and members states of the Union for joint action as an example of OIC efforts of preventive diplomacy. When we talk about the OIC role in conflict resolution and preventive diplomacy, I would like to highlight our efforts to rejuvenate our subsidiary organ, the International Islamic Fiqh Academy, Jurisprudence Academy, and its initiatives under the OIC General Secretariat's coordination, aiming at facilitating rapprochement among the Islamic sects. From Afghanistan to Iraq and Lebanon, this effort will surely make a positive impact. I would also like to add that we support the recent trend of intensification of regional peace and mediation initiatives, including the Saudi, Turkish, and Qatari efforts on different aspects of conflicts in the Middle East and the Horn of Africa. Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, the OIC, under its new vision, has undergone in a recent year a series of reforms and restructuring in order to effectively respond to and counter the challenges associated with the global social, economic, and political developments. Traditionally dominated by the regional conflicts affecting the OIC member states directly or indirectly, the OIC agenda has increasingly become occupied with new kinds of threats and challenges, including, but not limited to, international terrorism, religious extremism, incitement to religious hatred, underdevelopment, poverty, epidemics, food and energy crisis, effects of climate change, conflict resolution and prevention, post-conflict rehabilitation. In all these issues, OIC calls for partnership of the international community. In this framework, we believe that our cooperation with the United States is of crucial importance. Ensuring peace, security, and stability in Iraq, Afghanistan, Palestine, and Somalia requires our dedicated efforts and cooperation, as well as wise, right, and just approaches. Once these problems are over, then I do not see any obstacle in raising the level of partnership between the Muslim world and the United States to an alliance. Naturally, this long and demanding process would require the settlement of at least some of the differences between Iran and the United States by utilizing diplomacy and mutually critical dialogue to the fullest extent. Let me at this point express my pleasure to see the relations between the United States and the OIC are growing stronger since the wise and commendable decision of President Bush to appoint a special envoy to OIC. We have also appreciated the efforts, though belated, of President Bush and those of Secretary Rice to bring about a just and lasting settlement for the question of Palestine. It is our sincere hope that the next administration will build upon these efforts with a sense of urgency. The OIC is also encouraged by the endeavors initiated by U.S. to increase dialogue and interaction with the OIC member states. We welcome the intention of the U.S. to accompany the OIC program for development and promotion of socio-economic sector. We are particularly encouraged and place importance on the cooperation on joint projects in health services and eradication of poverty in the least developed countries. I sincerely hope that the dedicated efforts of Special Envoy Ambassador Sada Kamba will be allowed to bear lasting fruits that may require consideration by the next U.S. administration of extension of this useful mechanism. I have also believed that the United States epitomizes one of the best examples of how people of differing faiths and ethnic backgrounds can live, work, and interact with the spirit of a unified community. We are all ready to do our best to cooperate to strengthen this praiseworthy character of U.S. society and fostering mutual understanding with the Muslim world. At the end, I would like to conclude by thanking you all for your patience and for the Center for its hospitality. Thank you.
Would you take a few questions? We have a few minutes if you have any questions you'd like to ask. Anyone? Yes, please.
Hi, I'm from the Saudi Press Agency. Thank you for your talk. You spoke about the new OIC charter, and I missed the early part, but I'm wondering, does it talk about media reform in OIC countries and improving conditions for journalists and facilitating exchange of information between institutions and citizens?
Well, I didn't touch that, and I think that would not come in on the charter, but I think the charter, which is available on our website in 3 languages, English, Arabic, and French, calls for dissemination of information, and it has an understanding of promoting freedom of speech and of expression. But let me say that OIC had a very old institution which was created in the early years, in early 70s, and that was the International Islamic News Agency, which was dormant until recently, and part of the reform of OIC, we are trying to re-establish it in a new way after all this revolution in communication and the reality that we are living in a different world today in 2000 than it was in 1970s. The process is going very well, and one of the international houses of expertise is working with the newly appointed Director General of this institution, agency, to reform it and make it a viable agency.
Yes, here.
Ihsanoglu, thank you. You told that OIC, Organization of Islamic Conference, is the second largest organization after UN, and you are also you are playing a very important role in conflict resolution. What kind of cooperation do you make with United Nations, and can you please explain this issue?
Well, thank you for this question. I think we have now a growing interaction and cooperation and exchange of visits with the Secretary General. I have started this during the previous Secretary General, Mr. Kofi Annan, but I must say that now during Mr. Ban Ki-moon's, during the office, the years since he came, this activity has augmented, has increased sharply. We cooperate on many issues. On the issue of Somali, we contribute on the issue of the Chad, Sudan, and many other activities. We have a joint committee which meets regularly, where all institutions of OIC with the institutions of United Nations, they come together periodically, exchange programs, exchange ideas, and agree on certain joint projects. And this will increase for no doubt. There is a new spirit, and I think now the two institutions are functioning in a very harmonious way. I have referred during my remarks here that in 2005 I have initiated a joint statement with Mr. Kofi Annan and with Mr. Javier Solana in an attempt to calm down the reaction against infamous Danish cartoons. There we have a good cooperation. It was just in a few days that immediately they agreed on my proposal, my initiative to have this joint initiative. And then it was within a couple of days that we agreed on the text, and the text was announced in the same time in Jeddah, in New York, and in Brussels.
Yes. First, I must express my gratitude for the positive remarks you made about my book on Islamo-Christian civilization. Thank you very much. But the question I want to ask goes to the issue of what the resources are of the OIC. In other words, when you talk about its positive contributions to conflict resolution in difficult areas like Somalia or Darfur or Afghanistan, do you have the organizational capacity to go into the field and make independent assessments of issues on the ground? Or do you work primarily at the diplomatic and intergovernmental level? And if so, in the future, does the organization hope to have more of an independent capacity to act than perhaps it has at the moment?
Well, as the first part, which I fully understood, I would answer saying that we do both. It's a kind of both. That we send missions to assess situation, write reports, and we share this with the United Nations, with other institutions who are working with us, or we work with them. In the same time, we are part and parcel of many international efforts. Would it be, for instance, in Africa? Nowadays, the Senegal is the chairman of the summit, and President Abdoulaye Wade, in his capacity as a chairman of the OIC summit, has initiated the negotiation between Sudan and Chad. And I think this is working well, despite ups and downs. We have come to a certain point. For the second question, which I really didn't understand fully, if you can.
It's simply a matter of, do you anticipate in the future becoming more active, or are you satisfied with the level of activity?
No, of course, I'm not satisfied with any activity we're doing. I have to be honest, but I think we are on the way to much better performance and more conducive way of doing things. I think in next few years, with OIC becoming more successful in certain projects, that would help us in increasing our activities and having more good results. I would give you one example. For instance, in Somalia. In Somalia, we managed to be the only international organization which has the trust and respect of all parties. And this is, it's not an easy thing. I'm sure you appreciate that.
I have a short question. The name of the organization seems to refer to the initial meeting of the Muslim leaders. Do you have any plan to change the name of the OIC?
Well, I had planned, but I failed. And let me tell you the story. You can quote me if you like. How the name came first, we have to understand this. You know, after the abolishment of the caliphate in 1924, the whole Muslim world, the political leadership, intellectual leadership, filled a great vacuum and felt that something has collapsed, and something they lived for centuries with is no longer existing. Then there were attempts to remedy or to fill this vacuum. What to do? There is no caliph. The idea of discussing this and finding a way to do with this, the first idea said, let's have a conference of all Muslim leaders to discuss this issue. This is how the first conferences came. As early as 2 years or 3 years after the collapse of the caliphate, first one was in Cairo, second one was in Mecca, and then another somewhere in Europe, Muslim intellectuals, and in Karachi, etc., after independence of Pakistan, he always had Islamic conferences, Mu'tamar Islami. This is how it came. Then in 1969, when late King Faisal succeeded in getting together Muslim countries, leading 25 countries, to come together in Rabat, after he agreed with the King of Morocco to invite people to Rabat. They get together, leaders getting there, and this was another mu'tamar, this was another conference. Then there at Rabat, they decided to establish a permanent body, at least a secretariat to organize these mu'tamars, congresses, conferences. When it came to name it, afterwards there was a long discussion. There were ideas of call it United Muslim Nations, Islamic Nations, the League of Muslim Nations, of the Union of Muslim, etc., etc. But this was not agreed unanimously, where countries for and countries against. And then they said, well, let's say that this organization will be the organization of the Islamic Conference. And then, because Islamic here refers to conference, not to countries, not states, and that solves the problem of sensitivity of secular countries. Not only my country, but many others. Now, when I came as Secretary General, one of my first urgent targets was to change the charter, because this charter was done in early 70s and was really out of date, and change the name. And many leaders expressed their willingness to change the name, and they asked me to change the name. And I was keen. I put this in my reports. It is in Mecca Declaration. It is in the 10-year program of action. But when we came to change the name, we managed to change many things. Very radical reforms being successfully made in the charter. When it came to the name, it was not accepted. And I wouldn't tell you who were against that, but this is the fact that the facts, not my country, don't worry. Had it been my country, I would have told you this. I'm more easy on that. It's a big number. Others were for other names, but it didn't work. So we said, okay, keep it like this. Now it is known, and OIC is becoming known, etc., etc. So we kept it. I hope this answers your question.
Excellency, you talked about the reconciliation between the Muslim, the Islam and Christianity. But do you have any program to join together the Shia clerics and prominent Muslim sheikh like Khamenei, Sistani, Qardawi, all together to reconciliate? You talked about the reconciliation in Iraq, which is a regional problem, but in a larger extent between between Sunnah and Shia. Thank you.
Yes, we're working on that. The one we had in October 2006 was mainly for Iraqis, Shia, and we had about 15 of each leaders, top leaders of Ayatollahs and the Grand Muftis and big Imams, and they all for the first time came together under the banner of OIC. And even when we managed to send them a jet to bring them from Amman to Jeddah, and took them from Jeddah airport to Mecca, where we had, afterwards they came and said, this is the first time in our history we come together. Not only after the what happened in the last few years, but since ever, the first time they came. Now we're trying to do that more about, you see, in the Mecca Declaration and the 10-year program of action, we equated between 8 mazhabs, first time. 4 Sunni mazhabs, Hanafi, Shafi, Maliki, and Hanbali, plus 2 Shi'i mazhabs, Zaydi and Jafari, plus the Abadi and Zahiri mazhabs. So this is the first time officially in history of Islam, at least in contemporary Islam, modern Islam, that these 8 mazhabs were considered and announced officially by all heads of states that they are equal. Now, that one of the very important provisions which really were very much appreciated in many countries by scholars, by intellectuals, by politicians, etc. Now we're working on how we can spread that, how we can make that more meaningful, and to which extent we can enlarge this consensus. We're working on that, and there are a group of scholars within the framework of the Islamic Fiqh Academy, International Islamic Fiqh Academy, is working on that.
I was wondering if the OIC has a position on reform of the United Nations Security Council.
Yes, we have a clear position on that. We want a permanent seat for OIC. Well, it's not a joke. This is reality. If you consider the population of the Muslim world, 15 point something, 1.58 billion people. And when you have a permanent seat for all representatives of different civilizations, put it this way, I think there is, and since we have the monopoly of problems in the world. You name it. You name it. I think there is a need. We don't say that it should be this way or that way, but we say that there should be really a representation of this 1/5 of the world population, where you have the whole hell of problems taking place on their lands, from Afghanistan to Kashmir to Cyprus to Palestine to Iraq to Somalia to Sudan, Chad, and whatever is coming. Well,
thank you so much.
I do thank you.
Really,
thank
we are
you, Professor.
honored to have you here. Absolutely. Thank you all for being here.